Hi everyone. Nice to see you all. How is my hand like the Buddha's hand? A very old koan. And the response to the koan was kind of rather amusing, I thought. Playing guitar in the moonlight. That's what you do with your hands. In the Tang dynasty was playing the lute, but the guitar is a lute. So there you go. Playing guitar in the moonlight. What are humans really here for? That's what we're here for. I ran across this koan is, fairly well known, but not that much focused on. And I ran across "How is my hand like the Buddha's hand?" There's a series of 3 koans. How is my hand like the Buddha's hand? How is my leg like a donkey's leg? And from the point of view of karma, where did I appear? Where was my birth? The 3 koans, that the first 2 you can tell are related to each other. How is my hand like the Buddha's hand? How is my leg like a donkey's leg? Just in case you said, anyway, got too grand with the response to the first one. And there's a sort of generosity about that. Whatever you are, whatever kind of creature you are, the Buddha. And so I years ago, I was doing this series called Zenosaurus, where it's still on the web somewhere. It was kind of rushed, but I think of a koan and I just riff on it. And my riff on this one was, hands are so fundamental. Hands are there at the beginning for humans. They're how we interact with the world. And so I suppose we'd say they're how we are immersed in the world and how we commit to the world and how we talk with the world and how we receive the world. And the other part of it, so that's like the other part. And then the other part of it goes, I think, which I've been more aware of this time, is hands are what we make with, or they symbolize our making. Or sometimes I wake and I'm sort of writing in my mind, when I'm waking. And so that's hands, I suppose. and so hands are the creative act. And so I immediately thought of something that you might have immediately thought of too. But here's this is this amusing thing from Neruda when he was a child. One time, investigating in the backyard of our house in Temuco, the tiny objects and minuscule beings of my world, I came upon a hole in one of the boards of the fence. I looked through the hole and saw a landscape like that behind our house, uncared for and wild. I moved back a few steps because I sensed vaguely that something was about to happen. All of a sudden, a hand appeared, the tiny hand of a boy about my own age. By the time I came close again, the hand was gone, and in its place was a marvelous white sheep. The sheep's wool was faded, its wheels had escaped. All of this made it more authentic. I had never seen such a wonderful sheep. I looked back through the hole, but the boy had disappeared. I went into the house and brought out a treasure of my own, a pine cone opened, full of odor and resin, which I adored. I set it down in the same spot and went off with the sheep. It's a kind of transaction. Some of you know there's a fox visits me most days, or most evenings, or sometimes several times. Occasionally brings his family. It's a boy fox, and he brings his family. But his grandmother, who was a more creative soul, but he's very nice, but she was really something, used to take, say, an egg. I put out eggs and dates, and she'd take an egg. And then there's just an installation. Somebody gave me some billiard balls, and there's just an installation out there of just like billiard balls in a garden frog kind of thing. But that fox would take a billiard ball, always number 12, and put it in place of the egg. And so, and I very much appreciated the gift. And then, sometime in the next day or so, I put the billiard ball back, and then she could use it again, as a as a gift. And so this was it. He put a pine cone, and went off with the sheep. I never saw either the hand or the boy again, and I've never seen a sheep like that either. The toy I lost finally in a fire, but even now, almost 50 years old, whenever I pass a toy shop, I look furtively in the window. But it's no use, they just don't make sheep like that anymore. I have been a lucky man. To feel the intimacy of brothers and sisters is a marvelous thing in life. To feel the love of people whom we love is a fire that feeds our life. But to feel the affection that comes from those whom we do not know, from those unknown to us who are watching over our sleep and solitude, over our dangers and our weaknesses, that is something still greater and more beautiful, because it widens out the boundaries of our being and unites all living things. So anyway, he goes on in a very Neruda-like philosophizing way, but I think the essential thing is the marvelousness of the sheep and the exchange with the pine cone. So there we are, Neruda and his sheep. And here's something I think it's interesting. William Merwin is somebody who was very involved with Zen, and he also knew John Berryman, and so he has this little poem about Berryman that I think talks about the creative process. Although you can tell Merwin stood at some distance from life, I always felt. But and so you can feel there's both a sense of vastness in his work and sometimes a sense of sort of loneliness, really. I will tell you what is Berryman. I will tell you what he told me in the years just after the war, as we then called the Second World War. Don't lose your arrogance yet, he said. You can do that when you're older. Lose it too soon and you may merely replace it with vanity. One of those dopey opinions that older people give younger people. I'm probably doing that now myself. Just one time, he suggested, changing the usual order of the same words in a line of verse. Just one time, he suggested changing the usual order of the same words in a line of verse. Why point out a thing twice? He suggested I pray to the muse, get down on my knees and pray right there in the corner, and he said he meant it literally. And it was in the days before the beard and the drink. He had a big beard and drank a lot. But he was deep in the tides of his own through which he sailed, chin sideways and head tilted like a tacking sloop. He was far older than the dates allowed for, much older than I was. He was in his 30s. He snapped down his nose with an accent I think he had affected in England. As for publishing, he advised me to paper my wall with rejection slips. His lips and the bones of his long fingers trembled with the vehemence of his views about poetry. He said, the great presence that permitted everything and transmuted it in poetry was passion. Passion was genius, and he praised movement and invention. I had hardly begun to read. I asked, how can you ever be sure that what you write is really any good at all? This is the whole thing about his conversation. You can tell the whole conversation comes down to this. How can you ever be sure that what you write is really any good at all? And he said, you can't. You can't. You can never be sure. You die without knowing whether anything you wrote was any good. If you have to be sure, don't write. So, you know, Berryman, you know, with the silly things, that's great. And then Merwin gets points for turning into such an elegant poem. The other thing about hands, like if you give a koan to someone, suddenly like it'll start affecting. I've always been interested in that quality of the involuntary quality that we touch into, so that the universe sort of appears as us, but we didn't ask it to, and we didn't really tell it what sort of us we should be and things like that. So I kind of, and even when we open our mouths, we're not always sure what's going to come out, you know. And years and years ago, when she was much, much younger, my daughter somehow must have sat in on a talk and heard this koan, and she said, and she sent me this little thing. How is my hand like the Buddha's hand? Hand stinging from reaching through nettles to pick mushrooms. There you are. So you get, the little koan gets hold of you in some way. And I like that. And in some sense, the thing about hands is we move out. You know, we move out of with our hands, we move out of the solitude of being here into the companionship of being here, which is what Neruda's poem is about. Not poem, little story is about. I think I remember I had a Syrian friend who'd had a very, very rough time in jails in Syria, and Amnesty bailed him out. So I always donate something to Amnesty. But he'd been tortured and horrible things happened. But when he walked beside you, he'd always hold your hand. You know, it was rather nice. He'd sort of walk down the street with this fairly small, really dear guy holding my hand. And it was very nice. So there's that, the way we hold hands, and the mystery of, I suppose, what we used to call the mystery of incarnation. There's no way of knowing really where the universe comes to a stop. But everything is intensely particular, and we're intensely particular, and the flowers and the leaves and the birds and foxes and the eggs, the eggs the foxes like me to put out for them are intensely particular, and it's valuable. And how is my hand like the Buddha's hand, playing guitar in the moonlight? And so we have to love, I suppose we have to love without reservation the experience of being here in the body. Because without the body, you know, who knows where we are, and it might be very interesting, but it's not the same thing. So definitely not the same thing. And that sense of, you know, the whole Buddha's, most philosophies are really based on some sense of loss or fall out of the original perfection of not having a body and being, everything being one, you know. And Buddhism too, really, although it's all very clever about it, but it's, you know, it says everything is suffering. Says primeval Buddhism says it's all suffering, darling. So nothing to be done about. Just go off alone into the forest. And Zen doesn't think. Zen thinks that's not an interesting solution. So there's a lot of suffering, but also it's all love. It's all interconnectedness. It's all each leaf, each fox, each little leaf turning yellow, the first leaf turning yellow. It itself holds the whole universe. And it's a marvelous thing to know about that, and we're each comment that goes with that is each branch of coral holds up the moon. Every little finger, the moonlight is in it. So, and I think one of the things, I think in Zen, the idea of suffering is that actually it's turning away is the idea of suffering, when I think, I don't want this, it needs to be over. And so the big Zen move is sort of the dance move of turning towards. And then we're going to be okay, because we'll be there. We haven't abandoned ourselves to mortality. We haven't abandoned ourselves to the sorrow of being embodied. We're thinking, okay, this is what being embodied is, and we turn into it. And sort of blossoms come, and sheep get pushed through little holes in fences, and things. Foxes appear on our doorstep, looking in the window, thinking, you might have something interesting for me. So I think what I'd like to do now is just sit with this beautiful koan, really, for me, beautiful koan. And how is my hand like the Buddha's hand? There are actually many different answers to this koan. Like somebody says, like taking a ticket in the subway, some Japanese thing like that. And you can see the hand is still there. But playing guitar in the moonlight seems a superior response to me, the romantic response. I remember, here's another Moen poem. I remember being fascinated with Moen when I was trying to work out the spaciousness in things, And I remember carrying a couple of his early books with me when I was in New Guinea and in the islands, in New Guinea, and carrying them around with me. It was kind of a dopey thing to do, but it was kind of fun too. and then, eventually at some stage I got, went back to school, got a degree, went to Hawaii to study Zen. I walked into the dojo and there's Moen. It was great. So it was very funny and touching. This is Provision, a poem for the season. All morning with dry instruments, the field repeats the sound of rain from memory. All morning with dry instruments, the field repeats the sound of rain from memory. And in the wall, the dead increase their invisible honey. It is August. The flocks are beginning to form. I will take with me the emptiness of my hands. What you do not have, you will find everywhere. So there you have it. That's very typically him of that period. So, I don't know. Tess, do you want to test? Just got off red eye. We had lunch together in California yesterday. And she did a wedding, which I haven't heard any of this, but do you have anything to say, or you're just too bleary?
Well, I was thinking about, I'm not an artist in any traditional sense, but I was thinking how often my hands know more than I do, and in a lot of given situations. And I've at different points in my life done a fair bit of body work on people, and it's always interesting to me how I don't know what might be going on with them, but as soon as my hands might make any, actually even before I make any kind of contact with their actual body, my hands will tell me where they want to go. And I can tell if, that will already tell me so much about what it's like to be them or what the field is between us or something like that. And as you were talking, I was just thinking, yeah, there's something about hands that just bring us into the intimacy with the world. Like whose hands feel right in mine tell me something already, and whose hands feel awkward in mine. Or um, I remember working on this guy once, and it's kind of a mix of body work and imaginal imagery kind of work, and didn't know him at all, and I just had my hand on his shoulder, and I just got this image of a broken wing. And I told him, and he said, "Oh yeah, I tore that shoulder, however long ago." And so I just thought, oh, the hands are always telling us so much about what it is to be in the world. And yeah, yesterday I got to marry Tim Walters and his now wife Anne, for any of you who know them. And hands are such a part of weddings too, because you have the holding of hands and the exchange of rings and the joining of hands and all that kind of stuff, the way by which we take part in the world. So, and it was kind of sweet. It was in the botanical garden of Golden Gate Park, and kind of it's a place that you're very with the world while you're doing it, because you're on a platform and you're kind of secluded, but the whole park is taking part in the wedding in a sense. And at the very beginning, I said to everyone, like, let's just take a moment and listen and feel where we are and just who's with us or something like that. And as if right on cue, this lone goose came over and just honk, 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 honk. So it felt like a kind of goose blessing on the whole thing. So I don't know. Yeah, I think it's about what I've got in my red-eyed state, but happy
Very
to be.
good. Yeah, hands know something in the dark, don't they? Well, actually, we do too, but we can tell with our hands. Yeah. John Joseph, you have anything you want to say?
You were talking about holding hands with your friend, and just the quality of holding hands and the warmth in that. And for some reason, I went back to a memory that the first time I held hands with a girl, and I was in seventh grade, and my my mother made the boys go to I don't know if it's called cotillion, but it's like dance school, So we'd get dressed up in a collared shirt and wash blue jeans, and the girls would have a blouse and skirt, and everybody would look beautiful. And I grew up in a family of like six kids, and our default culture was it wasn't touchy feely. So um, I actually, when the teacher said, "Okay, now hold each other's hands," I didn't know how to hold someone's hand. I didn't know how to hold a girl's hand. I remember taking the girl's hand across from me, and we interlaced our fingers, and it was so scary and tender and sort of touching. And uh and we learned how to do the foxtrot, and then we dropped our hands and didn't have to touch a girl again all night long, which was just fine by me at the time. But that was a really kind of lovely memory of holding hands.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Michelle.
Hi. Uh, I went to a concert a few days ago, very unexpectedly. I didn't know I was going until about the day before, when I discovered it was happening. And this is sort of an aside, but the opening act was a young woman who just stood up playing a guitar. And as she was strumming her guitar, I was watching the hand that was strumming, and all I could see was one of those Buddha's hand fruits. The citrus fruit that's like yellow and it's got all the tentacles. And I think I've watched people strum guitars a million times. Never do I recall having had that image. And I was like, why is her hand so like a Buddha's hand fruit? Uh, and then the main act was this guy named Damien Jurado, or Jurado, who comes out of Seattle. And my stepson has been listening to him for 24 years, at least, you know. Um, and he's a fascinating musician. He's somebody that I think very much like when he talks about his own creative process, he talks about being a translator for what comes in, you know, as you hear many people do. And when Tess was just talking about her hands, uh, knowing what to do, I got the image of listening and the importance of the ability to listen, you know, as part of the creative process, and then let something come through us with the unique sort of particularity of who we are. And the whole when in people's practice, you know, it's a really cool time, I think, when there's a turn away from being more interested in what the world is asking of us, and more interested in what do I hear and what wants to come through me. um and each person is in a sense, I think, a translator, like Damien Jurado was talking about himself being, or so many people who are conscious of the creative process. Life is a creative process, right? Living our life is a creative process. And that, what do I hear when I listen deeply? And um, it's not like a one and done thing to turn towards what is ours and what wants to come from us. It's like over and over and over again, right? Like, oh, what am I discounting? What am I aware of? And what are my hands hearing? What is my body hearing? What is my heart hearing that I'm discounting in some way? Maybe I have an opinion, it's not important or something. And how do I get better and better at just listening and noticing what I actually notice? So I don't know. That's what came up for me today. Thank you.
Very good. Marie, is there any, you know a lot about how creative process works, and there's no obligation to say anything, but would you like to say anything?
John, thank you. I'd like to say that I have no idea how creative process works. Um, it's a miracle every time a portal opens. And much of my life is waiting for the portal to open and distracting myself unnecessarily because it's so difficult to wait. I'm so grateful for everybody, what everyone has said. I kept thinking about hands and how my dog came in earlier and I'd scratch his butt just in front of his tail. And that's what I was doing with my hand as we started today. And lately I love the word you use, John, incarnation, that we are incarnate. We are living in bodies, and it can be difficult sometimes. I can be so impatient. But I wanted to tell a quick story. My daughter, who I love, is going through something very difficult that makes it very hard for her to be touched right now. So this has been going on for months, and so I can't hug her or kiss her or hold her hand. And except lately, she can let me hug her just before she takes a shower at night. And I notice we keep getting into these tangles. You know, my idea of what she should be doing. You know, my inability to accept where she is. Mostly, that's really what our tangles come from. Me, and but last night I said, "We want to watch a movie with me," and she said, "No." She never does. And she said, "But we can hug. It was such a gift. I'm like, come on. And just to hold her with my body and my hands, to put my hands on her head and to feel her hair. And it was a great joy, and so much was resolved. I mean, utterly no problem, no nothing, just being able to hold her in my arms for, 40 seconds, 30 seconds. I love this idea of, and lately I've noticed, perhaps it's because of this time that's going on in my family, and I hold my own hands quite a bit. I'm trying to befriend myself. And I love, John, when you say, and you often say this in times I've heard you, not to disapprove of ourselves, not to disapprove of what we feel or how we think. Because the first thing I thought is, I don't play the guitar. Why don't I play the guitar? I'm a terrible person. I don't play the guitar. And and why didn't I ever learn to play the guitar? But the notion of sort of holding my own hand in my life now has become very important to me, to be an ally to myself, if you will, to this mortal person who's trying to live in time. And that's just what was coming to me today.
Thank you very much. That image of, I haven't been able to find out who it is, but it's a Renaissance image of a goddess sitting in the country, and she's going like this and holding her own hands, and it's a very common Renaissance image of the tenderness of that, So thank you. That's lovely. Nicola, do you have anything to say? I know I owe you an email. It's one of those funny things. That's the first thing I thought. Oh God, I owe Nicola an email, and then thought, well, it's nice to talk to her, and I'll answer the email later.
I've been really enjoying thinking about hands. My left hand feels very different from my right hand, and it always has. And my left hand is my writing hand, and my painting hand, and my sewing hand, and my right hand is my cutting hand, and my playing tennis hand. And I actually have no idea if you gave me a guitar, which hand I would use, because I don't play the guitar. And it kind of got me to wondering what the Buddha's hands felt like to him. And it got me to a memory of being kind of probably 3 or 4 and plunging my face into my father's hands, and the smell of his hand, which was slightly smelt of cigarettes and then smelt of something very, very comforting and warm. And that sort of is like the most comforting sort of memory of my childhood. And my mother's hands were long and thin, and she made baskets or knitted. She was always using them. And then it made me think of my son's hands, which are like my mother's hands, long and thin. And he made a drawing of the word hands out of his hands, which I sort of treasure because it's his hand. Yeah, so lots of hands.
Thank you. Hands. The first hands I think are, people, when it was a kind of, I don't know, a signature or a prayer or a thank you or something, where people would get some pigment and ochre or something and chew it up, and they put their hand on a cave wall and they'd blow blow the very liquefied pigment over their hands, and so you get the black outline of the palm, and then the pigment described by the pigment around it. And those hands are everywhere, like marked hands. The statement, the hand is what we say in the universe. what you did with a cave wall before you wrote on it, and before you painted other things, before you painted great, rhinoceroses and antelopes and cave bears and things. Find them in Africa and Northern Australia, Europe, and the hand as the emblem of what is profound and mystical.